Welcome. Thank you for joining us. We appreciate all of you being here. I'm going to go ahead and stop sharing the results. All right. So thank you for joining us today. Just before the pandemic hit, Turnkey was applying predictive analytics to our clients' data to help them make growth decisions. Then COVID-19 eliminated predictive analytics in the peer-to-peer space. Before we get to the content, as a reminder, this webinar is being recorded. The recording and PowerPoint deck will be available to you via email and posted on our website. We look forward to answering all of your questions today. So the best way to do this is to use the question and answer icon at the bottom of your screen. Questions can be entered in at any time during the webinar, and we will do our best to answer all of your questions after the content has been presented. So again, this webinar is being recorded. So now let's meet our speakers. Ryan Grosenick is our Senior Data Analyst at Turnkey. Before becoming a professional Excel junkie, Ryan graduated from Virginia Tech in 2016 with a BS in physics. While at school, he worked as a research assistant at the Center for Soft Matter and Biological Physics at Virginia Tech to develop a computation biophysics model to replicate filament assembly. This is where he learned to organize, prepare, and drive insight from big data efficiently and quickly. Now he is bringing the analytics tools he learned into from the hard sciences into the nonprofit space. Ryan has developed comprehensive systems of analysis to understand participant engagement, evaluate event performance, and predict future behavior to drive more engagement and fundraising for nonprofits across the nation. Jessica Hickman is the National Walks Director at the National Eating Disorders Association, which is also known as NEDA. She has spent the last 5 years developing and expanding their signature NEDA Walks program, and Jessica's passion for her work stems from her personal experience with eating disorders and body image issues. Through NEDA Walks, she is committed to building communities of hope, strength, and healing. We thank you both so much, and let's welcome Ryan and Jessica.
Hi, everyone. I'm Ryan, like Tessie said, and I'm an analyst at Turnkey, and we're going to get this show on the road. So today we're going to be talking about decision making, right? Because good decision making has never been more important now as COVID continues to keep fundraisers and donors housebound. Nonprofits in particular have been hit especially hard since their fates are tied to these fundraisers suffering from this COVID economy. So I think it's safe for us all to say that at this point our world won't ever quite be the same, okay? And that goes for our analytics as well. So before COVID, at Turnkey, we were working on predictive analytics in the peer-to-peer space. But predictive analytics requires stable and consistent data. And now that everything is up in the air, predictive analytics won't really help us as much since everything changes on a week-to-week basis. Benchmarking, on the other hand, is only now it's more useful, but still not really useful, since we can only really use it to gauge how things are different, but it won't help us make decisions. So in this light, what can we do right now to make better data-driven decisions? Now, the answer to this question is good ongoing analytics in the form of dashboards or things like weekly reports, right? These kinds of dashboards allow us to keep an eye on participant performance and make decisions on the move instead of waiting until a certain time to perform our analytics. Now, with this kind of analytics, we're able to react much quicker to this constantly changing landscape that COVID has given us to play around in. But before we can do good analytics, we need to collect good data. So what kind of data do we collect right now in order to get this kind of analysis going? I'm going to first talk about a mindset when collecting data, and then I'll give you kind of some specific examples of what we're doing a little bit later. So right now, in the mindset, when collecting data to build this ongoing analytics, We are focusing primarily on taking snapshots of your data on a consistent, regular basis. Now, snapshots here is simply just exporting your chosen database to like an Excel sheet or something that won't be overridden by like a database update. Right, if you export these snapshots every week, you'll soon have a pretty large ongoing collection of data to give your data folks the flexibility to do a lot of analysis. So for example, with NIDA, we are downloading their participant data every week, and we can then use that data to watch how their participation, fundraising, and engagement are changing on a weekly basis. Now this is really important because if we can see how performance changes on a weekly basis, we can intervene with outreach campaigns or other kind of things in our toolbox if things start, plateauing or going downhill. And once changes are implemented, we can then refer to this dashboard again to see if they've had an effect on participation, fundraising, or engagement after those changes are made. And if we need to, we also have the ability to drill down to the event or even the participant level if if necessary, to see what's going on. Now, this kind of mindset doesn't just apply to peer-to-peer participant data. You can also apply this to other revenue streams like your major gifts, sustainers, and sponsorship databases. So long as you're taking snapshots of the same kind of data consistently, you can apply this analysis to them. So this is also good for tracking how new event activities are performing that continue even after the pandemic, or how changes in volunteerism or staff affect operations. So long as you have some place where you can quantify the changes on a consistent basis, you can apply this mindset and build analytics around it. Now, as for a specific example, we here at Turnkey, we focus primarily on peer-to-peer participant performance. Say that 5 times fast. So we're focusing on collecting, identifying information for these participants so that if we need to, we can track individual progress, as well as their fundraising, of course. We're also collecting any event interactions that might occur, such as when they registered, did they join a team, et cetera, et cetera. And lastly, we're also paying special attention to any major engagement markers, like whether they interacted with social media or with email, which is really important for gauging if our outreach campaigns are working. So focusing on this kind of data gives us the flexibility to create dashboards that we can make decisions off of, whatever that problem might be. Now, of course, data collecting is the most important step. But once you have all that data, what do you actually do with it, right? So first, when we're looking to analyze this kind of weekly data, we want to define some core metrics that we can refer to on on that weekly basis. So here at Turnkey, we're paying special attention to 3 main things. In addition to participation and fundraising, because you have to look at those regardless. But 3 other metrics include the retention rate, which is just the % of participants this year that attended an event last year. We're also focusing on activation rate, which is the % of participants fundraising any amount at all, and also any interaction rates, which again is just the % of participants interacting with social media and email campaigns. So these 3 metrics to start with give us a really good quick view of how participants are performing and responding to changes. And they're usually the first indicators of any other issues that might pop up. So instead of looking at 20 different metrics, you can look at these 3 and then drill down to those other ones if need be. So this is what we're focusing primarily on. Now, once you have collected your data and you've chosen your fancy metrics here, you also need to format. You need to select a format in which to do your analysis. You can go the tried and true method of putting your data in an Excel table and reading through that if you want. But I think we can all agree that that is a special kind of awful, right? So instead, we recommend visualizing your data so that you can get a really fast, intuitive understanding of what's going on without the horrible eye pain that comes with staring at spreadsheets all day. So now let me quickly switch over to our demo. Okay, so this is my Tableau dashboard or workbook. This is a dashboard within a workbook. And you can see that it doesn't have to be really fancy in order for you to understand everything that's going on, right? In the upper left, we have the most up-to-date numbers for participants fundraising and average fundraising. In the bottom left, we have our activation rate in pink and our retention rate in purple. And over on the right, we have our week-to-week view of how participation and fundraising are changing over time. So we've also added goals here, you can see right here, for the participation and fundraising views so that we can see what we're shooting for at all times. Now, if the trajectory of either line is looking like it won't reach that goal, we can intervene and try to any outreach campaigns or anything else in our toolbox, right, that might help boost participation or fundraising. But I think we can all agree this is much, much better than Excel sheets, right? we understand things much better and faster if we can look at it instead of reading it. That's just a general rule of thumb for everything too, especially for dashboard design here. So this is our main dashboard, and we also have a dashboard dedicated to those other metrics I talked about. In the upper left, we have an organization-specific engagement score. The dashed lines there represent the goals we want it to be within. And in the bottom left, we have that activation rate again, the retention rate, and the team interaction distribution to reference to as well. And on the right, we have a week-to-week view of the activation rate. We can set this to whatever we want, but we can see how activation rate in this case has changed over time. Now, in this case, it didn't reach our goals, but we can see that it did recover from this little dip it had at the beginning. So whatever they did here, it recovered at least a little bit. So I also have two other dashboards here. Specifically, these allow us to compare events at a glance. So this is the participation comparison between upcoming and completed events. The goals here give us an idea of whether or not that event reached goal or not. But this, gives us a quick way to compare our events. Now, as you can see, these dashboards allow us to understand our participant performance very quickly, and they give us the opportunity to make data-driven decisions right now instead of waiting for a specific point in time. Now, when it comes to software, we're using Tableau here, it's really great for data visualization, but you can also do this in Excel just as well with pivot tables and pivot charts. If you give the data to your data folks, they'll know how to do it and can format it in this way or any way you want it to look. Now, ideally, you'll have been taking these snapshots since the crisis began, but I want to really iterate the fact here, it's never too late to start collecting data, right? So the more data you can collect, the more your analysts can do with it. And you can never have too much information when making big decisions, especially in this kind of COVID landscape. So I implore you to make it at least a little easier on yourself and let your data do some of that work for you. Now, to talk about that process, I'm going to hand it off to Jessica to talk about how she uses dashboards like this to make decisions at the National Eating Disorders Association. So Jessica, it's all you now.
Hello, can you hear me? All right, hi everyone. I'm Jessica Hickman. I'm the National Walks Director at NEDA. Really happy to be here. Thank you, Turnkey, for having me. I think what might be helpful is if I share a little bit basic background about NEDA's Walks program. And NEDA, so we're the leading national nonprofit supporting individuals and families affected by eating disorders. Our Walks program has been around since 2009, so somewhat new compared to some of the other folks out there, but we've grown a lot over the years. We operate close to 100 walks a year between a spring and fall season. We are a national organization, but we are not chapter based. Our program is overseen by about 2.5 staff members, including me, and we have some amazing volunteers on the ground and committees who help make our events possible. We've worked with Turnkey for almost all the time I've been at NEDA, so for about 5 years now. And in that time, they've really helped us narrow in on the most important data points when it comes to peer-to-peer fundraising, as well as those data points that are really specifically helpful to our program as far as strengths, weaknesses, and opportunities. Certain things that were really incredibly hard for us to assess through Excel spreadsheets and Blackbaud reports, they made really easy to pull and look at, and have helped us through already some major transitions, such as we went from being a retail model with registration fees to a non-retail model about 2 years ago, and the data they were able to help us read throughout that time was extremely helpful. And then more recently, we switched to this week-to-week analysis that Ryan demonstrated that has really been a game changer for us pre and post-COVID. So before COVID, we were set to have about 40 events in person between March and June. We had made it through only about 7 events before COVID hit. Our events were, at the time, in early March, they were progressing as expected. Just like with most events year over year, you have some that are, doing well, some that are underperforming. And at the time, our week-to-week analysis was, serving the purpose of being able to assess the real-time health and make interventions as necessary. For example, if an event was underperforming, we could look at, in what areas was it underperforming? Is this an opportunity to, reach out again to past top fundraisers and team captains, or do some more targeted community outreach beyond like our database? Or if an event was performing really well, what opportunities were there? Were there some new cultivation opportunities? So the week-to-week analysis had been really helpful for us leading up to COVID, and we were just kind of plugging along, no red flags, business as usual. And then, COVID struck, and we had an abrupt cancellation of events. And, per city mandates, and then ultimately by Anita's decision to protect the well-being of our community. So we ultimately decided to cancel all events, even if they hadn't been canceled on us. It felt like everything we knew about peer-to-peer fundraising had been thrown out the window. Wasn't the normal ups and downs or that events experience year over year. It wasn't like a simply understood or justifiable outlier. We've experienced like bad weather or a natural disaster that affects one event. It was, a pandemic that struck our whole program and our whole organization. So at that time, our week-to-week data began serving really like a totally different purpose. But the way it was already set up for us through Turnkey, we were able to really immediately dive in and begin assessing our data and grasp like how our community was responding or not responding during COVID-19. And what was really helpful for us to look at was engagement. So, engagement with emails, particularly, were people registering? Were they reading the fundraising emails? And ultimately, engagement had pretty much come to that like early mid-March point. Registration, donations, email engagement was stuck. And I mean, that wasn't surprising when you thought about everything that was going on. So we were able to take this information and create a plan. We realized that we couldn't continue business as usual. We didn't want to risk being tone deaf. So we paused all email communications. And at this time, I mean, we had really nothing other than this data to look at because this is before every like nonprofit professional organization was sending out webinars left and right, and there was like a wealth of information, all the same stuff, but no one really had experience with what was going on. So we were able to use the data to ultimately like be like, well, how can we engage a little bit differently? So we rewrote pretty much all of our email communications, even the ones that we have like automated through Turnkey. We removed things that were like pretty obvious, like see you at walk day, because we either we weren't sure if there was going to be a walk day, or we were like, okay, we have to figure out what we're doing. And then also from our organization, we were like, we need to get out a statement. We need to change our walk emails to let people know like our event has changed, but our mission hadn't. And so when we started to send out those communications, we were able to see through our own like internal, like through Team Razor, we were able to see people were engaging with the emails we were sending out really well, like better than even just like our general recruitment emails. And we're also able to see like a slow but steady increase in engagement and registrations and donations through our week-to-week data with Turnkey. But for us, that using that data was really, really important, and being able to confidently, at least somewhat confidently, make the decision to pause and readjust, because we realized that, you know, like adding uncertainty to uncertain times wasn't particularly helpful. And so aside from being able to use the data, we also were considering something, you know, the other things that Ryan mentioned earlier to consider, like other revenue stream, volunteer engagement, and community engagement, and just what was going on with our community. So everything we knew about peer-to-peer fundraising and how our program had normally progressed and performed was really non-applicable, but we still knew our community, and we knew that they were really suffering right now. So eating disorders particularly thrive in isolation, and our community was experiencing added stressors, such as like food insecurity and disturbances to treatment plan, and a hyper focus on fitness and the COVID-15. So we realized that, you know, our numbers might suffer right now, but our community didn't have to. So we were able to switch our focus from, you know, fundraising to mission delivery and providing support and connection and resources. And we hoped that, you know, the fundraising would follow when our community was in a place to do so. And our week-to-week data with Turnkey ultimately proved that we did start to see that slow and steady increase when we started engaging with our community differently. And ultimately, what we learned through our very quick and reactive virtual walk season was how to engage with our community during crisis, especially with understanding how the crisis was directly impacting people with eating disorders. And we were able to take that experience, take that data to ultimately pilot a new type of event, a new type of virtual event. So last weekend we hosted what we called the Warrior Experience. We actually, from a lot of like phone calls with colleagues that were hosted through Turnkey, there's a lot of conversation about, you know, the word walk, and we're like, well, this isn't really a walk when we're like behind a computer screen. And like, so we were inspired to like create an experience, and we learned through our week-to-week data and the email engagement that we needed to express the urgency of our cause during this time, because people were still donating to other causes and to other campaigns, but the general like donate and fundraise to support NEDA's programs and services that help people with eating disorders wasn't going to cut it. So we were able to really narrow down like our email communications, and we were able to do some like A/B testing like internally and see what like worked well. So like, for instance, for us, during this time, we saw a dramatic increase of calls and chats to our helpline because people were really struggling and needed resources and needed help. So we decided to create a campaign that was to very specifically fund our helpline. So it was like a direct response campaign. It was like a COVID relief fund, help fund NEDA's helpline for 2 months because of the increase in demand for support. And based on what we learned, through our very, again, reactive fall season, we created a really successful event. The event raised over $60,000. And just to put that in perspective, a NEDA walk typically raises anywhere between $5,000 and $100,000. More concentrated in that 15 to 30,000 range. So this was really big for us. And thank you, Ryan. So yeah, we learned really, I mean, the week-to-week data, the engagement piece was really key for us, because, you know, we're still figuring out those like fundraising benchmarks and like a new like normal for us. But again, what we saw, what we experienced through the height of the pandemic enabled us to collect enough information and try out enough new things to make a confident decision to host a fully virtual fall season. I know a lot of organizations and folks are not really sure what to do about fall, but we felt really confident in making this decision because what we saw with our data was events were really affected differently based on like when they were canceled. If they were canceled before they even took off, they didn't really take off. If they were canceled while they already had some momentum, they did okay. But ultimately, us being able to say, like, we're going to go all in, all virtual, we're going to be able to create this fresh, proactive, robust plan that we applied to the Warrior experience that then proved really successful. So we are aiming to have a maybe different, successful fall season. So that's really like the story of NITA and how we've used the data that with Turnkey to adjust and make decisions instead of leading or not leading in fear, and make some really bold but important decisions.
Cool. So there you have it, folks. So that's what data you should be collecting, how you should be looking at it, and also how to use that in the nonprofit space to make decisions. At this point, I'd like to open it up for questions. I think there's a Q&A bubble that you can go into. Tessie, is there any other things we should mention here? Any housekeeping things that, please don't use the chat to ask questions if at all possible, because it's harder to see in the chat.
Well, as I see that some of you are starting to type in your questions, I have a question for both of you. Is there anything that you feel is maybe like a small detail, something that you wish you would have tracked from the beginning and realized it like later on that, oh darn, that this piece of information would have been really helpful to start from the beginning, that, you know, many of us might have forgotten about?
Speaking just from the analyst side of things, since I'm usually like the last person to know the plan for an event, knowing exactly which events are going to be rescheduled to go virtual or whatever the plan is, I can then track that much better if I know about it beforehand. So we can see how the different virtual, rescheduled, et cetera, change over time by themselves instead of just, you know, like on the aft end of it. So if I know that beforehand, we can track how those things change. We can see what approach is working the best. And I know I've been pushing that with our clients a lot, but that's for me on the analyst chair. Jessica, do you have anything?
Yeah, for our organization, something that I guess got really messy, but was kind of, and to some extent unavoidable, was, you know, we had over 40 events across, you know, a few weekends. There was multiple events on one weekend that were ultimately merged together. I wish that we had a cleaner way to have like merged those together on our side, rather than having so many individual campaigns like under one. Ryan did a really incredible job like merging that all for us on like that data side, but you know, looking back in like a couple years, hopefully we're not going through this again, and that's not why I'm looking at it, but that would have been helpful for like from an organizational standpoint. But that learning that and how it was like just been really messy for us helped us like, let's cancel fall's not happening and we'll break it into 5 regional events, so that we can have good data by region and information that's going to be simpler to look at and assess, rather than like a really messy web.
Another question is, since many of us, once we are in a little bit more of a positive, brighter space and start hiring new people on with our organizations, do you feel, or how do you feel is the best way to communicate to these new individuals coming into these departments the data and information? Is there maybe a suggestion you could give, whether it's organizing something or how we can communicate how important, you know, this data is so that they don't go through it and just say, oh, this is meaningless and let's get rid of it?
Jessica, do you want to answer that? Because my approach is to give the exact same kind of spiel I just talked about.
I guess like for us, what has been really helpful for when I take this information that Ryan puts together and I share it with other people in the organization is making sure there's a real like clear understanding of the terminology, like what is included in like the engagement score, so you can understand why that is so important. Because some people I know with like previous leadership in our organization, all we cared about was funds raised. That was the only number that mattered. But we know that there's a much bigger story to that, and having a clear understanding and making sure like leadership and other people in the organization understand what does engagement mean, what does activation mean. I think that tells how important that is. So just being able to like have the big picture instead of just looking at number of people, number of dollars.
Perfect. Thank you. We have a question from Miss Peggy Shriver. I hope I said that right. Ryan, can you go over the slide that spoke to predictive analytics and trends and the fact it is only so helpful right now near the beginning? It was well said and could be used in discussing the status of donor acquisition and retention with boards. It was short, sweet, and to the point.
Okay, yeah, so let me pull up that slide again just real quick. Come on, Zoom. Okay, there we go. There we go. Okay, so as for other analytics, and I'll go into a little bit more detail here, predictive analytics, usually what we're looking for and what data scientists are looking for is, you know, we want to be able to predict the future based off of previous experience, essentially. And machine learning algorithms, they need a lot of training data in order to predict effectively. And it's only really helpful if that training data that we use is going to reflect the future in the first place. So before COVID, what we were doing is we were taking previous years, like down to 2010, we'd train up a machine learning model to predict some kind of behavior with the expectation that in the future, you know, participants are going to behave approximately the same way. We have the same data. We can predict based off of that data. Now with COVID, every week there's a new thing going crazy. And machine learning models, unless we train the model to expect that craziness, it will not be able to predict very effectively. Now, something we can do is we can take a predictive model from the old world, you know, the old world order, and we can predict, you know, the likelihood of a participant to behave in some way if this was a normal year. And you can use that as kind of a starting point. Like in a normal year, we would expect these participants to do X, Y, and Z. But with all the craziness, you can't say, you know, you have to knock off that predictive power like 20% or 30%. Like, okay, in a normal world, this guy is 80% likely to come back next year. With all this craziness, maybe that's not the case, but we can start with these folks. We can do X, Y, and Z to maybe hold on to them. For benchmarking as well, since benchmarking is just, let's look at the past, let's do all the numbers and figure out what the average retention rate was using that metric again. Again, that's all in a normal year. Now what we're doing at Turnkey is we're taking those benchmarks, we're comparing values now to what they were before to see, you know, to quantify exactly how much has changed. But again, you can't use that as a, you know, we benchmark 30% retention rate on a normal year. This isn't a normal year, so it's only going to be so valuable. I hope that answered the question. I know that was much more long-winded than my very short and sweet synopsis earlier, but I hope that answered the question.
Well, luckily we also have it recorded, so She can always take that version and this one. We also have a question for you, Jessica, from Miss Margarita. And she's wondering, in planning a fully virtual walk season, does your organization have any concerns about virtual burnout to your supporters between now and then?
At this time, we don't have concerns because actually as we were rolling out our virtual programs, people wanted more of them. So they were like, can we do this every weekend? We did a handful of them every weekend. I think would be an oversaturation, but what we ultimately decided to avoid that like burnout and oversaturation of virtual events coming from us was to strategically say, we're just going to host 5. We'll designate them in different regions to accommodate different time zones because we found that sweet spot for us was like 11 a.m. Maybe what is a benefit to our organization is our events have always really been centered around a program of speakers because people with eating disorder struggle with overexercise, and so it was never really a physical event. People were showing up for the speakers. They weren't showing up to like go on a 5K or anything like that. So that has actually been an advantage for us. So right now we don't, because we're really focusing on creating diverse programming across the events, and we've developed a lot of different interactive components. So right now we feel like we're in a good spot. Could we do this forever? I don't think so, but I think it is something actually we will explore adding into our event portfolio for forever-ish.
Great, perfect, thank you. I think we have one more. Oh, nope, she says thank you too. All right, so I don't know if we have any more questions that are gonna come in, so we'll give you guys just another moment. But in the meantime, let me ask you guys, I would ask for something really positive from this experience of COVID. Something positive you guys can think of that maybe you can share. Anything at all, just to bring some hope around the topic, because I know it can be downing sometimes. So what would be something you'd like to share?
For me, something that was so awesome was to be able to bring together NIDA walkers and speakers and influencers from all over the country into events. Like that's what we were able to create, these really unique opportunities to connect that people responded so well to, and they were like, we wouldn't have had this opportunity at a physical event. So that was really cool for us, and that's what actually, you know, inspired us to say like we should be doing this. We are, you know, a national organization, and we can host these national virtual events. And it, you know, was answering a need we weren't previously aware of.
From my seat, I'm glad we were able to jump on these analytics so quickly once, you know, things started hitting the fan with NIDA, and for a couple other clients, we were able to really jump into action very quickly with this kind of stuff. So that's what I am hopeful for, and, you know, hoping for COVID to get better. Knock on wood.
One more question that came in too is there a tool out there that would be able to help us when our new events are coming and the ones that we're trying to predict some numbers for? Is there a tool out there that we could use that will allow us to do some goal setting that you are?
You know, the data science answer is it depends what you're looking for exactly. That would be a question I'd take offline, I think, because it really does depend on what you're going for. If you're going for stuff like what we just talked about, Excel and Tableau, they're all very fine to do data visualization and stuff, but they're not super heavy on the like predictive analytics kind of stuff.
Would the Turnkey calculator also be helpful?
Turnkey calculator can get you started. That's on the website. I don't have the URL on me, but if you go to the turnkeyp2p.com, that can get you started as well in the analytics section.
All right, perfect. Well, that, unless we have any other questions that come in or anything else that you guys wanted to add, I would say that would conclude the question and answer portion. Thank you so much for both of you joining us today. We really appreciate your time and all of the helpful information you shared. And just as a reminder that this webinar is being recorded and will be posted on the website as well as shared with you in an email. So thank you so much.
Jessica's got one more question.
Oh, right.
So come in.
Oh, perfect.
So it says, Jessica, how many hours are your virtual events? For a virtual gala, how long would you recommend?
Well, we have not had a virtual gala, but our virtual walks, which is a program of speakers and entertainment, a live Q&A, some have even had dance parties. An hour and a half for us has been the sweet spot. We were finding that an hour wasn't quite long enough to offer enough content and enough diverse and inclusive content. So expanding to 1.5 hours was the right move. We received some really no feedback about that being too long. Some people were like, oh, I wish it was longer. But I can't imagine people would really want to sit on their computer for like 2 hours. So I'd recommend an hour and a half, probably for 1 hour to an hour and a half, depending on what type of content you're offering.
Alrighty. Unless anyone has any other questions, I think that will be it for us.
All right. Thank you so much, everybody. Enjoy the rest of your day. We hope to see you on another one of our webinars. And thank you again, Jessica and Ryan. We appreciate you both so much.
Thanks for having me.
Thanks for having us. All right. Bye, everyone.